President Donald Trump has recently made headlines with statements suggesting a possible resumption of US nuclear weapons testing. These remarks come at a time of heightened international tensions, particularly following Russia's advancements in nuclear technology and ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. Trump's directive to test nuclear weapons on an equal basis with other nations signals a potential shift in long-standing US policy, which has avoided nuclear detonations since 1992. The ambiguity surrounding what constitutes testing, whether it refers to warhead detonations or delivery system checks, has sparked debate among experts and policymakers. These developments have raised concerns about the stability of global security arrangements and the risk of triggering a new arms race. As world leaders and arms control advocates react, the implications of Trump's statements continue to reverberate across diplomatic and military circles. President Donald Trump has recently called for the United States to restart nuclear weapons testing, marking a significant shift in long-standing US policy. He argues that this move is necessary to ensure the country maintains parity with other major powers, specifically citing Russia and China, who have continued to advance and test their own nuclear capabilities. Trump stated that if these nations are conducting tests, the US must do the same to remain competitive and secure. His announcement has sparked widespread debate, with critics warning that resuming nuclear testing could undermine global non-proliferation efforts and provoke similar actions from other countries. The specifics of what such testing would entail remain unclear, but the rhetoric signals a more aggressive nuclear posture. This development has raised concerns about increasing tensions and the potential for a new arms race on the world stage. There is considerable ambiguity in President Trump's recent statements regarding the resumption of US nuclear testing. The term testing can refer to a range of activities, from detonating nuclear warheads underground to conducting routine checks of missile delivery systems without actual nuclear explosions. Since 1992, the United States has limited its nuclear activities to non-explosive tests, focusing on system reliability and safety rather than warhead detonation. Trump's directive has raised questions about whether he intends to authorize full-scale nuclear detonations or simply expand existing system checks. This distinction is critical, as resuming explosive testing would mark a significant departure from current policy and could have far-reaching international consequences. The lack of clarity from both the administration and the Department of Energy has left experts and global leaders concerned about the potential implications for arms control and nuclear non-proliferation efforts. Resuming nuclear testing by the United States would have profound legal and policy implications. Such a move could undermine long-standing international agreements, most notably the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which aims to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons and promote global security. Although the US has not ratified this treaty, it has adhered to its principles since 1992. Renewed testing could prompt other nuclear-armed states to follow suit, eroding the credibility of non-proliferation efforts and destabilizing established norms. Experts warn that this shift might trigger a new arms race, heighten mistrust among nations, and complicate diplomatic efforts to manage nuclear risks. The international community remains concerned that these actions could weaken the global framework designed to limit the spread and use of nuclear weapons. President Trump's recent rhetoric has drawn a direct connection between the resumption of US nuclear testing and the heightened state of global tensions. By emphasizing the need to match the nuclear activities of countries like Russia and China, he has signaled a shift toward a more assertive nuclear posture. This approach has raised concerns among experts, who warn that such statements could lower the threshold for escalation and increase the risk of miscalculation. The invocation of terms like World War III in public discourse reflects growing anxiety about the potential for major conflict. As nuclear policy becomes intertwined with ongoing crises in regions like the Middle East and Eastern Europe, the possibility of broader confrontation looms larger. Trump's rhetoric, while not outlining explicit plans for nuclear use, has nonetheless intensified debates about global security and the future of arms control. Experts are increasingly concerned about the heightened risk of nuclear escalation in several global hotspots. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine has raised fears that miscalculation or desperation could lead to the use of nuclear weapons, especially as rhetoric intensifies on both sides. In the Middle East, tensions between Iran and Israel have escalated following recent missile attacks and retaliatory strikes, prompting worries that regional conflict could spiral into nuclear confrontation. China's growing strategic ambitions and modernization of its nuclear arsenal further complicate the global security landscape, as its posture may influence the actions of other nuclear-armed states. Analysts warn that any move by the United States to resume nuclear testing could trigger a chain reaction, prompting other nations to follow suit and undermining decades of non-proliferation efforts. The convergence of these factors has led to renewed discussions about the possibility of broader conflict, with some experts cautioning that the risk of miscalculation is now higher than at any point in recent history. President Trump has adopted a notably hardline approach toward Iran's nuclear ambitions. In June 2025, he authorized military strikes targeting Iranian nuclear facilities, aiming to disrupt Tehran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. US officials claimed that these operations inflicted substantial damage on Iran's nuclear infrastructure. However, intelligence assessments suggest that key stockpiles may still remain intact, and the International Atomic Energy Agency has reported increased activity at Iranian nuclear sites since the strikes. This escalation has heightened regional tensions, with concerns that further conflict could prompt broader instability. Trump's stance signals a willingness to use military force to counter perceived nuclear threats, reinforcing his commitment to preventing Iran from advancing its nuclear program. Despite President Trump's recent announcements regarding US nuclear testing, significant uncertainties persist about the actual scope and intent of these policies. His statements have suggested a possible resumption of nuclear tests, but it remains unclear whether this refers to the detonation of nuclear warheads or simply the testing of missile delivery systems. Experts caution that such ambiguity leaves room for misinterpretation, both domestically and internationally. The Department of Energy, which oversees nuclear testing, has not provided concrete details on what form these tests might take. This lack of clarity has prompted concern among arms control advocates, who warn that even the suggestion of renewed testing could provoke similar actions from other nuclear powers. The potential consequences include undermining existing non-proliferation agreements and increasing the risk of escalation. As a result, the international community continues to closely monitor developments, emphasizing the need for transparent communication and careful policy decisions. President Trump's use of the term World War III in his public statements has introduced a heightened sense of urgency and risk into discussions about global security. Rather than outlining a formal policy or doctrine, the phrase is often employed rhetorically to signal the potential consequences of escalating nuclear tensions. This language has permeated mainstream discourse, prompting both public concern and debate among policymakers about the likelihood of large-scale conflict. Experts caution that such rhetoric, while not an explicit commitment to military action, may influence perceptions of threat and shape international responses. The repeated invocation of World War III underscores the gravity of current geopolitical challenges, particularly as nuclear policy shifts and regional conflicts intensify. Ultimately, this rhetorical strategy serves to frame the stakes of US actions on the world stage, potentially affecting both diplomatic negotiations and public expectations. The prospect of the United States resuming nuclear testing has raised significant concerns about a potential chain reaction in global nuclear policy. If the US moves forward, other major powers, such as Russia and China, may feel compelled to respond in kind, escalating their own nuclear activities and testing programs. This tit-for-tat dynamic could undermine decades of progress made under international non-proliferation agreements, including the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Experts warn that such developments might erode trust between nations and weaken the global framework designed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. The resulting environment could foster an arms race, increase the risk of miscalculation, and make diplomatic efforts to contain nuclear threats more challenging. In this climate, the stability of international security becomes increasingly fragile, with the possibility of broader conflict looming larger than before. If the United States resumes nuclear testing, it could signal a significant shift in global security dynamics. Such a move may lower the threshold for nuclear use, making the prospect of nuclear conflict more plausible. Other nuclear-armed nations, like Russia and China, might respond by conducting their own tests, potentially triggering a new arms race and undermining decades of non-proliferation efforts. The increased risk of miscalculation or misunderstanding between rival states could heighten the chances of escalation, especially in volatile regions such as the Middle East or Eastern Europe. Experts warn that these developments could erode existing international agreements and foster an environment where nuclear threats become more routine in diplomatic and military standoffs. Ultimately, the resumption of nuclear testing by the US would not only challenge global stability, but also raise the stakes for future conflicts. Regional tensions in the Middle East and Eastern Europe have reached critical levels, raising concerns about the potential for conventional conflicts to escalate into nuclear exchanges. In the Middle East, ongoing hostilities between Iran and Israel, coupled with recent US military involvement, have heightened the risk of miscalculation. Intelligence reports indicate increased activity at Iranian nuclear sites, suggesting that the situation remains volatile. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine continues to strain relations among major powers, with nuclear rhetoric becoming more prominent. Experts warn that any breakdown in deterrence or diplomatic communication could lower the threshold for nuclear use. The combination of aggressive posturing and ambiguous policy statements from global leaders has made the prospect of escalation more plausible, underscoring the urgent need for careful management and dialogue to prevent catastrophic outcomes. President Trump's use of the phrase "on an equal basis" signals a shift in the United States' approach to nuclear policy and international relations. By suggesting that the US should match the nuclear testing activities of countries like Russia and China, Trump is advocating for a more assertive stance in global security affairs. This rhetoric has the potential to alter diplomatic dynamics, as it may be perceived by other nations as a move toward heightened competition and reduced willingness to compromise. Military relations could also be affected, with adversaries possibly responding by increasing their own nuclear activities or revising their strategic postures. The ambiguity surrounding what testing entails, whether it refers to warhead detonations or system checks, adds uncertainty to the international response. Overall, Trump's language reflects an ideological alignment with a more aggressive posture, which could make diplomatic negotiations more challenging and increase the risk of miscalculation in high-stakes conflicts. Recent shifts in US nuclear policy have drawn global attention, particularly following President Trump's statements suggesting a possible resumption of nuclear weapons testing. This marks a significant departure from decades of restraint, with the last US nuclear test conducted in 1992. The ambiguity surrounding these announcements has heightened international concerns, especially as other major powers like Russia and China monitor and potentially respond to such moves. Simultaneously, escalating tensions in regions like the Middle East, notably between Iran and Israel, have further complicated the global security landscape. Experts warn that these developments increase the risk of miscalculation, where misunderstandings or rapid escalation could inadvertently lead to broader conflict. The combination of renewed nuclear rhetoric and active regional disputes underscores a fragile moment for international stability. The recent shifts in US nuclear policy and escalating tensions in regions like the Middle East have brought renewed attention to the possibility of a global conflict. While the term World War III is often used as a rhetorical warning, experts caution that the risks of miscalculation and nuclear escalation are real and growing. The ambiguity surrounding nuclear testing intentions and aggressive posturing by major powers could undermine long-standing non-proliferation agreements. In this uncertain environment, the role of diplomacy becomes increasingly vital. Constructive dialogue and international cooperation remain essential to reducing tensions and preventing the outbreak of a broader war. Ultimately, the future of global security will depend on the ability of nations to manage disputes peacefully and avoid actions that could trigger irreversible consequences.